Welcome to the Self-Defense Warrior Podcast, where our hosts, Jeffrey Wilson and Pat Militich, probe the minds of experts from a vast spectrum of knowledge on how to best prepare for the inevitable emergency situation to come. Jeffrey and Pat in the Self-Defense Warrior Podcast are your insurance policy moving forward. And now, here they are, the hosts of the Self-Defense Warrior Podcast, Jeffrey Wilson and Pat Militich.
Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, kicking off another episode of the Self-Defense Warrior Podcast. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever this presentation finds you. We got a good one today. Jeff Dornik from the Jeff Dornik Show. But before we kick it off, I am rolling, as always, with my partner in crime, UFC Hall of Famer, Eater of Worlds, Pat Militich. Patrick, how are we doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Jeffrey, and I'm excited to speak with our guest, who's a very knowledgeable gentleman about happenings in the world.
Well, we have plenty of those going on. Jeff, how are you doing, sir? Talk about how do you get your show kicked off? What's the show all about? What's the kind of content people can expect to find over at the Jeff Dornik Show?
Yeah, definitely. I've actually been podcasting and having a show for, it's probably been about five years now, and it's kind of morphed. It's been a very interesting development. I started off as a strictly Christian theological show where I was just interviewing pastors and theologians and all that kind of stuff. And then as time was going on and all the craziness going on in the world, I slowly started getting pulled into politics. And then a buddy of mine, JD Rucker, approached me about kind of joining forces. We ended up starting Freedom First Podcast Network. And so we started that. I, launched the Jeff Dornik Show, and from there, I'm just been doing shows every day. We're talking about all the controversial things that you're not supposed to talk about in public society, like things like COVID-19, vaccines being bioweapons, election fraud, conspiracy theories, crazy stuff going on. So it's been fun. It's been fun. All the people that I've been able to meet, interview, pick their brains. I feel like I've learned more just from picking people's brains than anything else. So it's been a lot of fun. But I air my shows every single day, Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock Eastern on Rumble, Getter, Clout Hub, and as of late, I'm back on Twitter. So we're on Twitter as well. So it's been a lot of fun doing the show.
Well, I bet. I think, Pat, we have a little bit of frame of reference for those kind of topics he mentioned. We've been going down the rabbit hole, starting out on the farm, the Conspiracy Farm, and now here over at Red Voice Media with the Self-Defense Warrior Podcast. Pat, were you about to jump in there?
Yeah, I was going to ask, since you mentioned Twitter, Jeff, I wanted to ask you, my thought is when they start these new social media locations and all the conservatives run over there, and then you've got Elon Musk saying, I bought Twitter and now it's freedom of speech. How much do you see this as actual freedom or as a honeypot?
I've been concerned about Elon and what's actually going on with Twitter specifically. I mean, Elon historically does have ties with the World Economic Forum, which anybody that does have those ties, I tend to kind of question their motives and are they actually being honest and all that kind of stuff. But we'll see how it all plays out. My concern with what's happened over the last several years since Twitter's been doing all their censorship, craziness going on, is, you have all these alternatives popping up. People like Gab, people like Getter, people like Clout Hub, all these places. None of them, except maybe Gab, but even then, none of them are actually truly free speech. Gab says that they are, but I know that they've censored some people and things along those lines. Getter's definitely not a free speech platform. I've interviewed Jason Miller. I like what they've done. It's a slick platform. It's probably the best alternative in the sense of the user face and all of that. But they're a free political speech platform. They're not an actual free speech platform, and I actually, got him to confirm that on my show. Same thing with Clout Hub. Clout Hub has a list of, I forget how many words that you're not allowed to use on their platform, and they'll stop you from posting. I remember I posted one show where the guy sent me the title of our show that was on Freedom First Network, and it was a weird combination of words, but basically he had accidentally written the word do twice, so it said do. That was actually censored on Clout Hub. They did not allow me to post that because it was inappropriate, because it was doo-doo. It was the stupidest thing in the world, but it shows what's going on when you have all these guys that claim we're a free speech platform, but we're going to stop you from saying these words or talking about this topic or things along those lines. So it's kind of been a trap to a certain degree on both sides because everybody's searching for that free speech platform, but I don't think it's actually out there.
Yeah, I find it very
So, and
ironic
then,
that
to go further, sorry,
go ahead, buddy. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, going further into it, finding out the FBI, had employees at Twitter and all the other stuff that we already pretty much knew. It's just confirmed now. So through the government, we are having our free speech suppressed. And so all of those others that are doing the same thing, I mean, it is complicit. They are complicit in the crimes of suppressing free speech using, government power and their corporatism. And it's at some point, when do citizens wake up and go, hey, man, we're done. We're done with the crimes being committed against us. We're done with the suppression of free speech, the suppression of the truth, or at least the search for truth. And that's a scary, very slippery slope that we're on right now.
Yeah, well, and I think that was a really good point about all these other platforms being complicit in all of this, and because the reality of it is, like as you said, it's been confirmed that the FBI and our government has been involved with the censorship game, especially with big tech. And I think a lot of times we think big tech as being Twitter and Facebook and Google specifically, but the reality of it is it branches out much further, and we've seen this with platforms like Truth Social and Getter and some of these others that they rely on the Google App Store, on the Apple App Store. And so what they end up doing, they have their censorship, set up. Truth Social is actually using artificial intelligence that's developed by Silicon Valley in order to actually further the censorship goals that Apple and Google are putting on them because they want to be in those app stores for people to download. The only one that I'm actually seeing that's actually, creating an alternative and not caring about the app stores is Gab, and so they don't even have an app. But all these other platforms, they're so beholden to big tech, and big tech is beholden to the FBI that whether it's directly or indirectly, they're all being complicit in this censorship game, and it's all trickling down from our government, violating our First Amendment rights.
Well, and not only is it censorship, you going back to Operation Mockingbird coming out of World War II, it's about creating narratives, creating false narratives, and maintaining those narratives through the media.
Yeah, no, that's also very important, and we've seen that play out. I think especially on Twitter, but obviously all the different platforms as well, where not only are they censoring people, but then they're pushing particular narratives on almost every time I see a particular headline or narrative running on social media, I immediately think the truth is probably the exact opposite of what they're pushing, and it's really interesting seeing these narratives come out. Everything from everything related to COVID, everything related to the vaccines, and then you start going down this rabbit trail of thinking, okay, so is everything that they're either censoring or promoting, does that tell me exactly what the truth is? And then what then throws me for a loop is that Google, like one of the biggest things that Google's been censoring over the last 5 or 10 years has been flat Earth. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, I don't believe in flat Earth, but why is Google censoring that? It almost messes with your mind. It's almost like they're just trying to create this chaos to where you never actually know what's really true.
And we've talked about that. I forget his name. Vladislav Surkov used to work for Putin. He was talking about asymmetrical and nonlinear warfare. It's like in an asymmetrical warfare, the point isn't to win the war. It's to keep you wondering what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
What is true? No. And as they invert reality, it just exacerbates that notion.
Yeah, no, it's true, and we see that playing out, especially with all these mainstream media narratives, because what's happened, and again, I always preface every single interview that I give with, I live in communist California. I'm probably very jaded because I'm surrounded by Democrats, surrounded by liberals, surrounded by people that are still wearing 5 masks and bragging about their 8th booster that they've gotten. but the reality is, like, these people, it's like they can't trust their own eyes anymore. Like talking to these people, they can't, it's like they can't verify that they're literally seeing on the news every single day people dying suddenly, randomly. This didn't happen before. They can't see what's happening in front of their own eyes. They can't look at data anymore because they have to trust the expert. They can't trust themselves. And I really learned that a lot when I would sit down with my liberal friends that are all pro-vaccine, all that kind of stuff. And I sit down and I go over the actual FDA approval letter for the Comirnaty vaccine. And they're like, it protects you from contracting COVID, it protects you from spreading it, and all. And I'm like, if you actually look at the data, you actually look at the numbers in there, you do realize that what they actually said is that the COVID-19 vaccine made by Pfizer and BioNTech, it protects you from COVID by a grand total of 0.7% when you compare natural immunity to the vaccine. 0.7%. And this is going to make you laugh even more. For 7 days after getting injected. That's all that they tested it for, was for 7 days. They tested 40,000 people, a grand total of like 170 total people contracted COVID-19 during those 7 days after getting injected. 95% of them were unvaccinated, but they only took that very small sample. But when you compare the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated, it actually only improved your protection for 0.7% for 7 days. That's all they tested. That blows everybody's mind, but they're like, but then why would Fauci? Why would the FDA? Why would everybody say that it's going to protect you indefinitely? It's like they can't get past this expert. They have to trust the expert. They can't trust the data. They can't trust their own eyes. They can't trust their own reason. And that's the effect of all this craziness going on, like what you were talking about with all these narratives.
Well, and I was listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson was on, I forget his name. I think it was the Valuetainment guy. I'm sorry if I forget his name, Ben Ray or something like. Anyway, he was saying to Tyson, he's like, the vaccine doesn't work. It's like, why did they say, like you said, it'll keep you from getting or spreading it? And he said it morphed, it mutated. So you're still using the same vaccine for, a virus that mutated and still assume it's effective? He's like, no, that's why it's less effective, because it's mutated. I mean, it was just this weird, and we're going to get into mental gymnastics. Like the mental gymnastics, like you said, people have to do to rationalize to themselves. I don't know if it's, why, what is people's, me and Pat have been asking this over the last 3 years. What happened to us where we just gave up? Not to say we ever all had free thinking minds, but why are
What's this? Hold on. I got to interrupt you.
People.
What's this we stuff, Jeff? What's this we stuff? You got a turd in your pocket?
Wait, sorry, I didn't hear that.
That's unnecessarily interrupting me.
What is the we? What is the we stuff?
Society. What happened to society?
Okay.
Our ability to critically think about anything. And I mean, people necessarily, like you said, your liberal friends, they're not necessarily stupid people. But they just fall for, old Beverly Hills Cop. They fall for the banana in the tailpipe like every time. And it is that mass Stockholm syndrome. You keep believing that people have been lying to you over and over again. But I mean, maybe I just answered it's some kind of variation of Stockholm syndrome. Why are people falling for this? We're watching people die left and right. I got an article here. Mass deaths. People are wondering in Australia, why are so many people dying? My cousin last week, a week and a half ago, lives in Australia, 51 years old. Inoperable blood clot causes a stroke and he dies a few days later. And this is just all over. I mean, this is just my family. I saw a dude fall out right in front of me, 30-some years old, going to seizures, just got his second jab. This is about a year and a half ago. 30-some years old, had to be rushed to Iowa City, which is a big trauma unit. Had to have a chunk of his skull removed because he had a brain bleed aneurysm. Is in what's called assisted living for the rest of his life. We're watching this happen right in front of us. Why aren't people seeing it?
Well,
I ramble there.
Well, no, it's a good question, and it's a good point. I think for anybody to say that there's one particular thing that's contributing to it, I think is, you're missing the big picture, because I think we have to take a step back. We have to look. There's different motivations for different people, but I think a lot of this comes back to either people are too lazy to do their own research and like, look, I don't trust myself. I'm gonna trust this other person who went to school for 20 years and in Fauci's case botched the AIDS epidemic and all that kind of stuff. I'm gonna trust that guy because he's an expert. He's been put in this place. But the other side, I saw a lecture that a psychologist gave. And he made a very interesting point that what they've done is they've created this chaos to where you don't actually know what's true unless you actually legitimately sit down and spend hours diving into the data, diving into the research, diving into the narratives, like I've had the opportunity to do. But they've created this chaos to where, again, you're questioning your reality. And then on top of that, you've got this supposed pandemic that's been unleashed on the world, and it creates fear. Because remember in the beginning, they were saying tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people are going to die from this thing. Well, that turned out not to be true. But what they did is they started off with this fear tactic to get you to, first of all, question reality, second of all, to live in fear. And then what ends up happening when you live in fear, you become more trusting of somebody else because you're looking for answers. You're looking for a way out. You're looking for that leader to follow. And that's been one of my biggest concerns with our country and the state of where we are right now is we've got a bunch of people that just want to play follow the leader. And then we're just picking our leader to follow, and we're just following them down the rabbit hole. That's a very dangerous place for us to be when we give up our own critical thinking, we give up our own constitutional rights, we give up our own rationale, we give up like legitimately looking at what's happening in front of us and questioning our very reality. That's a massive, massive concern with where we are right now. And I think it all comes back to the mass chaos and the massive amount of fear that's being instilled into people every single day, to where they're just looking for a quick, easy answer and somebody who claims to have the answers. And that's going to be a Fauci. That's going to be a Bill Gates. That's going to be Pfizer. That's going to be all these guys because they claim to have the answer. So we're going to follow them because I don't want to die from COVID. That's the rationale, I think, about what's happening right now.
You know, and this is we have a different, you know, it all comes down to loops of information. Who do you get your information from? How have you obtained your information? Have you questioned the information that's been fed to you over the years? And, you know, for me, everything started really, my mind opened up when I read G. Edward Griffin's book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. And once you look at the monetary system and realize how fixed everything is and how everything is just, you know, it's not real. It's just a lie. Everything is a lie. And once you realize that, then you go, wait a minute, if our monetary system and the whole system of money is a lie, well, what else is a lie? And then you start going down the rabbit holes of the education system, of the medical system, of all these different systems that have been put in place. And you recognize, wow, is there anything that's actually true? And, you know, over 20 some years ago, when my first kid was going to be born, I started researching vaccines and I dug into it when the information was really readily available if you wanted it, right? And so after researching pretty deeply for about a week, and I was raised by a woman who was a great woman, a nursing director, ran a nursing school, you know, very intelligent lady. I was pro-vaccine at the time when I dug into it. And by the time I got done after a week, I went, this is no way. And knock on wood, you know, all three of my kids have really, besides sniffles and coughs and stuff like that, have really never been sick. Nothing ever to even, you know, besides one staph infection that one of my kids had on their leg from, you know, whatever. However it happened, there's been nothing serious ever. So, you know, their immune systems are bulletproof. They've not been injected with toxic chemicals and heavy metals and all the other stuff, the foreign DNA and aborted fetal cell DNA and all the things that can cause everything to go wrong with the body. They've not been exposed to. And I think that I'm not condemning anybody for following and doing what everybody's been told to do. I'm just telling you that, you know, the things that are causing illness are the things that are trapped inside of your cells, you know, the heavy metals and the synthetic chemicals and all the other stuff. And there are ways to get rid of that stuff out of your body. There are ways to get rid of it. And it's only through the power of what God has created, and it's organic.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a really good point. You know, there's a couple different, you know, trains of thought I was thinking as you were saying that, because on one hand, you know, I'm out here in communist California where we just made it out here, and I say we loosely because I'm completely opposed to this. But in California, it's now illegal for doctors to be anti-vax, not just COVID, but just in general. And there's 37 doctors right now that are facing losing their medical license in the state of California right now for writing vaccine exemptions in general, not just for COVID, but for kids to go to school because the parents didn't want them to get the polio vaccine or, you know, one of these other vaccines. And these doctors would write exemptions for these kids to not get vaccines that they needed to get into school. And now these 37 doctors are now facing losing their medical license in the state of California for writing these vaccine exemptions. Again, not just COVID, but in general. That's a very dangerous place where doctors can't even have their own medical opinion based upon their own expertise. They just have to follow the leader. That's part of the problem there as well. But then, like you were saying, with all the craziness and all the chemicals that are in these vaccines, that's a major danger with what's going on right now. But also too, we also can't forget, it's not just the vaccines that are causing all these crazy health issues and all that kind of stuff. It's also all the chemicals that we're consuming in our foods. It's all the pesticides.
Absolutely.
It's all the plastics that we're using. It's all the nonstick pans that we're cooking with. It's all these things. And my wife and I, for probably the last decade, we've basically weeded out all of those things from our lives. We eat almost pretty much exclusively organic. We don't use nonstick pans anymore. We threw away all the plastic in our house. Everything's glass or stainless steel. We're very particular about those kinds of things. And I got to say, looking at myself versus the rest of my family, I'm the only one without health issues. I'm the only one that's healthy, and it's because of the food that's going into my body. I have not taken pharmaceutical drugs except one time for a medical emergency that I had to take. I haven't taken pharmaceutical drugs in probably over a decade. The thing that we've got to understand is like you said, God created us to have an immune system. There's certain things that you can do to build up that immune system, but it's not injecting yourself with all of these chemicals that are probably creating autism, probably creating ADHD, probably creating cancer, probably creating all these autoimmune issues. And if you look at guys like RFK Jr. and all the research that they've done, it showed the vaccines are actually creating this kind of stuff. And on top of that, then you're dealing with all these hormonal issues that are coming from the plastics that are leaching into your foods because you're sticking it in the microwave. And it's this crazy.
And the herbicides and all the other stuff that destroys testosterone levels and estrogen levels, all of it.
Exactly. And this is one of those things that I think it's been good about the COVID vaccine, debacle, about what's been going on, because it's waking up a lot of conservatives to what's going on. Because this used to be just primarily a lefty thing, talking about going organic and going green and all that kind of stuff. But it's been good that conservatives are waking up to that. But we've got to take it a step further. It's the farming. It's how we're raising our food. It's where we're getting our food. It's what we're putting into our bodies on a daily level. It's what we're having around ourselves in our own environment, in our own home. What kind of scents, what kind of fragrances are you putting around? Are you lighting candles that are filled with chemicals? It's a deep rabbit hole that you can go down, but it's also, when you actually research this stuff, it's dangerous, the kind of stuff that we have around ourselves on a daily basis.
Yeah, and that's it's medical, medical and environmental terrorism, literally, is what it is. And they're being paid massive amounts of dollars, and these corporations are making billions of dollars off of these products. Just something as simple as, my daughter was having armpit. She was breaking out, one of my daughters. And I said, well, what deodorant are you using? That's the problem, and switch over. And since she switched over, doesn't happen anymore. All of these things, because our skin, it's the biggest organ we have. So anything that you put on your body, you're going to absorb a lot of it, and it's going to cause, some serious issues. And so people need to recognize that, stop buying those products, period. But then we talk about common sense, right, Jeff? And we say, listen, just stop eating these types of foods, the processed foods, all this stuff. Stop using these products that have aluminum and parabens and all these other things in them. But their minds have been so dulled. 59% of Americans are on at least 5 pharmaceutical products or more. So we know that many pharmaceutical products dim the usage or the activity of the frontal lobes, which basically creates narcissism. It creates a lack of empathy, a lot of these other things. We've talked about this before. So they're just not thinking straight. So when we talk to them and say, listen, man, this is common sense, they're not connecting. Yeah,
no, that is a very good point. And also too, it's like you look at like our food, for example, right? If you look at it's conventional food and organic food. It's like the organic is seen as the other. It's the alternative. Like if it's an alternative lifestyle, alternative medicine, alternative food, alternative nutrition, when in reality, it's the way that God made it. That should be the conventional, but conventional.
It's the only form. It's the only forms of food and the only form of medicine.
Yeah, exactly. And what do you think? It's like we talk about conventional medicine and conventional food. That's the stuff that it's genetically modified. It's full of chemicals. They dump just massive amounts of pesticides and herbicides and all that kind of stuff all over this kind of stuff. It's crazy, but the terminology that we use in this country is I think really contributing to the brainwashing of the American people, where it's like they don't want to be seen as other. Everybody in today's society wants to fit in. They want to be a part of a group. And so even all these crazy alternative lifestyles and all that kind of stuff that are going around in our country right now, at the same time, it's because they're trying to fit in with that particular group. And that's part of the problem with what we're dealing with this health issue specifically, is that people don't want to be seen as other. They don't want to be seen as conspiracy theorists. They don't want to be seen as this weird freak that only eats organic food and only eats paleo or whatever it might be, when in reality, this quote unquote alternative lifestyle of eating clean and healthy and eliminating chemicals and eliminating plastics from your life, in all reality, it's the way that God intended us to be, but we're seeing it as strange and other from the quote unquote conventional lifestyle that is just basically giving everybody cancer, giving everybody autoimmune issues, giving everybody food allergies. It's crazy, the kind of backwards thinking that we have, but I got to say, it's very intentional, in my opinion, that this is happening because of the intentional word usage that's being laid out by our government and by our leaders.
That proves the objective, period, end of story. And the conversation that Jeff and I were having when I was walking into this building to do this show, I said, the NFL just announced, and the NFL's Players Association just literally announced that just broke that they are stopping all protocol for COVID. So no more vaccines. Obviously, there's a lot of players that are suffering from injuries, vaccine injuries, right?
Yep.
And I was talking about this. Jeff was on speakerphone, and I was walking in because I was carrying a bunch of stuff. And there was a guy, looked like he was, early 20s maybe, and he was ahead of me walking. And when he heard the conversation that Jeff and I were having, he turned around and looked at me, and absolute terror in his eyes, because he had never heard anything like this probably in his life. And so that's the kind of stuff that people need to hear and be shaken because they've been programmed with emotions. They need to be deprogrammed with emotions. Let's deprogram them, either with comedy, as Jeff always says, spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, or with absolute terror and fear. It's got to be one or the other that shakes them to their core so that their lizard brain gets deprogrammed and reprogrammed with the truth.
Yeah, and it's been really interesting talking to people that have switched over in recent times from being a progressive to being a conservative in general, and getting red pilled or whatever it is that we want to call it. It's been really interesting talking to a lot of those kinds of people and seeing what was that moment where you switched. And and I talked to a lot of these guys, and what's ended up happening, it's when they started questioning the narratives that were coming out of them almost every single time. It's almost verbatim. Is as soon as they realize, for example, I talked to Brandon Strzok. I've had him on my show a few times, of the walkaway movement, and one of the things that he told me was the thing that started sending him down the rabbit trail of maybe what the mainstream media is telling me is not true. What had to do with all the accusations against Donald Trump, attacking the disabled reporter, and saying that means that Donald Trump was hateful towards that guy, when in reality he saw these clips of Donald Trump doing that exact same motion towards all these different people,
right?
That were not disabled, and he's like, so if they're lying to me about that, what else are they lying to me about? And then he went down this rabbit trail, and he discovered that he's being lied to all the time. And I hear that story over and over and over again. But the key is getting people to just find that one point of contention where they feel like they're being lied to by somebody. And then you can wake them up to, they're lying to you about this. They're also lying to you about the vaccines. They're lying to you about the COVID vaccines. They're lying to you about election fraud. They're lying to you about all these different things. Then you can begin to red pill people. But it seems like it's almost exclusively as soon as they start questioning what they're being told is when people start to wake up.
Well, and we've talked about this a lot, and I think ultimately it triggers their ultimate, what the catalyst was in the first place was their laziness, because the rabbit hole is so dark and deep, and they've lied to us about so much. So it belies this question, like you said, what else are they lying about? And then the next question is, wow, what do I then have to do about it? Because then you have to take ownership of the fact that you're being lied to, and then you have to change how you see things. And
You've been listening to the Self-Defense Warrior Podcast with Jeffrey Wilson and Pat Militich. Watch the complete interview on Red Voice Media Premium using the link below, completely uncensored and ad-free. Not a member yet? Try it for $1.